Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have another incredible episode for you guys today, so hopefully you enjoy. A lot of news happened last week, a lot of it not very good news. So we're going to try to discuss the three big news items from last week and then get into other topics as well. And there's a connecting thread between some of the three topics that we saw last week and other things that I want to get into to make larger points. And we've also got a lot of cognitive leak questions today. So we're going to have a jam-packed episode filled with a lot of great content and a lot of information for you guys to boost your IQ. So the real question is where to begin? Either start with Trump indictment or the Covenant school shooting or even the Ricky Vaughn conviction, which those are the three main topics that we're going to discuss today and see a similar thread within them and make points about where we are in this country and the political situation. But I'll go with the Covenant school shooting because that was the first thing. That happened when I was recording my episode actually last week. That happened, but I don't think it had been fully confirmed that it was a transgender shooter until after I posted the episode. It was a horrific shooting, cost the lives of 6 people along with the shooter. Shooter was thankfully taken down by police before she could kill anybody else. 3 kids died along with 3 adult staff. And, as I argued in my column last week, this just shows that we live in a freaking insane asylum in this country. This is always the cause of all these mass shootings, is that we have so many broken, deranged people that feel that the only way that they can operate in the world is through mass violence or making their mark. And they feel nothing restraining them from doing that type of violence. And this person wrote a manifesto, likely could be anti-Christian, likely is, fully into the transgender mindset about how people weren't accepting her for, there was confusion over whether this is a male to female transgender. It turned out to be a female to male transgender. We're still going to, Audrey Hale, I guess the original name was Hayden Hale. I don't know even the full, what her original name is, but we're going to call her Audrey Hale. And this person is very much a, broken person, and they had a lot of anger over not being accepted by their peers. And this person had gone to the school long ago. This person was like 28 when they committed the school shooting. She complained that her family wasn't accepting her, and there was a bunch of sympathetic news articles. And then there was all these news articles talking about how other media outlets and the police have misgendered her and how this is an outrage. And it was a very bizarre situation. But the real thing is that, I'm always surprised. Sometimes I'm surprised we don't have more mass shootings, just as how many fucked up people there are out there. And there's not really, and people want to say, well, we'll get gun control, blah, blah, blah. But there's been plenty of mass shootings where somebody was not even supposed to have a gun. There's an example, in 2017, there was a Texas church shooting. Sutherland Springs, I think was the name of it. There's so many mass shootings that it's hard to keep track of all the names. And this guy was a discharged vet who had a criminal conviction while he was, I believe, in the Air Force or in one of the service branches. And so he was not supposed to own a firearm. But, his paperwork was never properly processed, and he was able to get one, and he was able to kill over 20 people at a church. A totally deranged, violent person. So a lot of these people who are not able to own guns will still be able to own them. And and even with the continued push for criminal justice reform, there's going to be a lot of felons and others who will still be able to have guns. The main thing is they don't want to have normal white Americans to have guns, but they're fine with, criminals having guns and transgender, people with mental illness having guns. They're going to say, oh, if you have a history of mental illness, you can't have a firearm. That's basically going to preclude a lot of transgender people, a lot of other people that they want to have firearms, and criminal record, that's going to, exclude a lot of blacks from owning guns, and they're not going to have that. They're just going to basically find, have you supported Donald Trump at all? Okay, then you're not allowed to own a firearm. But Mr. Jaquarvius, who just got out of jail, due to a false imprisonment, yeah, he can buy whatever gun he wants. And so, and even they don't even want to go after straw buyers and other things because straw buyers are predominantly non-white and because I mean a lot of these guys who have clean records will go out and buy firearms and then sell them and distribute them to people who are not able to buy firearms. And that's contributes to a lot of the urban crime, but they don't want to really go after that because it overwhelmingly targets non-whites, so they don't want to do that. There's too much systemic racism in the justice system for that to occur. So even the gun stuff, there's so many people who mass shooters. There's a number of mass shooters who've gotten guns who weren't supposed to use them. I think even the Uvalde shooter wasn't even supposed to own a firearm, and he got one. And so the gun laws aren't going to work. And it's also, even if the gun laws did work, they would use something else. They would use a car. They would use, a knife. They would even build a bomb. There's so many ways for these people to kill. And just taking a gun away from them, or a specific type of gun, an assault rifle or whatever they want to call it, away from them, is not going to turn them into normal people, that's the impression, is that these guns are possessing the people, and that they're an otherwise normal person, and then they get a hold of the gun, like, I want to kill, and that they are set out to kill innocent people. That's not how it is at all. These people are already fucked up. They're already messed up. They're already broken. There's already something inside them that wants them to kill. And if they don't have the firearm, they'll find another way to kill. Maybe it makes it easier for them, maybe that it's not, but it's just not going to work. And any type of gun control bill or legislation that would be implemented by our government would be trying to make it harder and more difficult for law-abiding white Americans to buy firearms. Meanwhile, the criminals and the crazies would still find ways to kill people. Now, the connecting thread with a lot of this is the response. One thing is, I don't want to get this as like too black pill, but I don't even want to see this as a black pill because it's about as expected. One thing is that conservatives responded that the real cause of this was transgenderism, and it was pretty much a universal response. All over conservative media, talk radio, Fox News, the internet, the conservative media websites, Daily Wire and that type stuff, they were all pretty much shared this assumption that the reason that this shooting happened was because it's a transgender person, and this would count as an anti-Christian hate crime, which it likely, depending on what the manifesto says, it likely is. And they stuck to that line, and I think a lot of people got that message, the correct message of the shooting. And it did do a lot to undermine that push for gun control. There's always a major push for gun control after these shootings, depending on if they use a quote-unquote assault rifle or something that they think they can ban. If somebody uses a handgun or a shotgun, generally that doesn't work. It's the same with the Dylan Roof shooting in Charleston in 2015. They tried to put gun control then, but the guy, Dylan Roof used a handgun. I mean, they're not trying to ban handguns. So they then just moved to Confederate control. Here, they're trying to do that, but I don't see that there's as much movement now, and there's also more of a debate over whether it's transgender. The real disturbing part is how the left responded to this, is that not only were they pushing for gun control, they're also pushing hard for trans acceptance. They even had a trans day of visibility on Friday, or last Friday. And all this type of stuff, and it's like the real victims are transgender, and there's a tons of news articles saying about the real victims are transgender and this stuff. And this we've seen this before. Anytime there was an Islamic terrorist attack, they would always say the real victims are the Muslim community, and the Muslims are fearful that this person is doing this terrible thing, and that they don't, the real backlash is going to be the Muslims. The real victims are Muslims. And they've had this storyline prepped for all those occasions. And now they're using it for transgender. But the funny thing is I think there's more support for this, or not maybe this particular type of violence, but there's more support for for violence of this sort among the transgender community than probably elsewhere. I mean, if you just see, or just at least transgender online accounts, I mean, the amount of times that they're fed posting, it's just unreal. It's unreal. And they will post, and I mean, even their public protests is transphobes kill yourself, or, I'm going to kill a transphobe, or something of that sort. They always say this type of stuff, and they're very open about it. And compare it with right wingers, they have to be, very circumspect about their, fed posting of that sort. But, transgenders just feel no compunction about fed posting as much as possible. And with all the heated rhetoric about how conservatives are trying to genocide them or wipe them out or eradicate them, and this is promoted by the mainstream media and certainly their own like social media output, it's not surprising that these guys turn to violence. I mean, the media is hyping them up to hysteria, saying that like conservatives are coming to kill you. You have to fight back. And then there are accounts, that are allowed on Twitter, that are allowed on Instagram, that are allowed on YouTube, allowed on all these big social media channels are talking about arming up and shooting people. And then they're like, wow, I can't believe this has happened. And then the media would come and blame the reason for the shooter, who murdered 3 children, in cold blood and 3 adults. But, remember, this person killed 3 9-year-olds. I think, maybe one was 8 years old. But anyway, they're all under 10. And the media is trying to blame Tennessee state legislature for banning drag shows for kids and banning trans surgery for kids. And they're trying to say that this is the real cause of this and this is the real blame. And that the real solution here is to ban guns and then to lift these bans so transgender people don't hurt any more innocent people because they're noble individuals and they could do no wrong. But, only, outside forces can make them do something evil and heinous. But when it came to the left's reaction of just like a transgender shooter, kills children, and their response is to celebrate transgender, and do this trans day of visibility, that's a little bit too much. I mean, they wouldn't have even done this for Islam, or for Muslims. I don't think we've had a lot of Muslim terrorist events, and Bush did say, Islam is a religion of peace after 9/11, but it's not like he did that Muslims shape the soul of our country like Biden did with transgender. It's like they are at the heart of our civilization. They're at the heart of our culture. And it's like very weird for that to say that. Like Obama wouldn't even done that, after the San Bernardino shooting or numerous other these terror attacks that happened in the 2010s. And said like Muslims are at the heart of our culture and they shape our soul. And I think they would have been like, that might be bad optics. That might be a little bit too much for right now with those terrorism. And they would defend Muslims and they would say, Islam is a religion of peace, but they wouldn't go overboard. But with transgender, it's like full on overboard. Like these people are a rule. These people are heroes. These people need to be, protected from doing any more mass shootings. I don't know what even the point is. And they went full end to like defending transgender and just like imposing it on the population. Now, I think, in one way you could say that that's like a massive flex of their social and cultural power and how they don't feel that they have to even acknowledge these concerns. And they'll just like impose this and shove it into people's face. At the same time, I don't think it was as very convincing. I think a lot of people were, this put off a lot of people, what they were doing. I think it was just very bizarre. It was very bad timing. It was very tone deaf. But they're going to go along with it anyway because they feel that there's a moral justification for this. And they feel that the cause of trans rights or what have you is a moral cause. It's a morally superior cause. And their morality pushes them to go to the next level on this. To pushes them to say this is what is good and what is necessary. I mean, it's similar to like, imagine after the Christchurch shooting, they decided that like, Nazis shape our soul's culture. They've been like, well, I mean, that's like unthinkable to even think about it, but that's like similar to what's happening here. But they feel it's a moral cause and they want to promote it and that they see the transgender people as innocent victims and, even when they do bad things, it's not their fault. And what's really needed here is to defend and promote them even more. And it even goes into the way, Bud Light. People have been discussing this, how official this thing is. Like, maybe it might have been a minor marketing deal. Like, Dylan Mulvaney is a pretty big social media star. So this person could, promote the brand or what have you. And maybe Bud Light wants that additional exposure, but maybe they didn't intend Dylan Mulvaney to be like the star, like an ad star. But, that Dylan Mulvaney now has some type of partnership deal with Bud Light. And this is upsetting people. And it's, It's just a part of our culture now. I mean, these companies do feel, the companies and institutions do feel that this pride stuff is about showing that they're good, that they care about social causes, and they care about what Gen Zers care about. They care about what Zoomers, and not all Zoomers, of course, but like the Zoomers who are politically active, or who are majority left wing. I know there's a lot of right wing Zoomers who listen to this podcast, and of course you guys are exempted, but there's a lot of woke Zoomers, and they think that they're appealing to that demographic with this, and they feel they have to do this. It's like the same with like sports leagues doing Pride nights. They feel they have to do this. That this is to show that they're good and moral, and they fit our prevailing moral dynamic in this country. And so that's why they that's why after a school shooting committed by a transgender shooter, likely inspired by transgenderism and those type of things, they decided to double down on support for transgenderism and then pretend that they're the real victims. And even a beer company decides to make some type of partnership with a trans actor, or I don't even know what Dylan Mulvaney is, like a trans person, like public figure, trans celebrity. I don't even know what that person does, but they're somebody, I guess, social media influencer. So the thing to take away from that is the left and liberals feel the ability to flex. They can flex their muscle, they can flex their power, and they've been doing this a lot ever since, really COVID, but especially at 2021 and past. And they really feel like they can flex. And this happens both with the conviction of Ricky Vaughn and with Donald Trump's indictment. I'll go into Donald Trump's indictment. There's, I do want to go back to the connecting thread of all these topics on this, but I will discuss my thoughts on all these topics. But with Donald Trump's indictment, we expected this. It looked, they leaked it. They're not going to, even though it did look maybe he was going to back away, maybe, and they delayed it, but it happened, and he's turning himself into arrest for tomorrow. And it's a big deal. It's the first time a former president's ever been, charged with a crime after office. It's the first time that they face jail time over something that is involvement. Most people say this is the flimsiest case. I even think most people aren't even aware of what it's over. They just say Trump's indicted, and it's like, for what? For crimes. And it's like, for what? And it's, the payout of Stormy Daniels is like it's not even really important, because pretty much most analysis say that this isn't really rises to the level of a felony. It's might not even rise to the level of a real crime, but much less even a misdemeanor or a felony. And it's just a flimsy case. But Alvin Bragg feels that he needed to do this. There's a push within his office to do this. I feel that they may feel that the federal government is not going to indict him. He's facing criminal investigations from a lot of places. New York AG, they punted on doing, they recommended federal investigation over his financial improprieties or what have you, but they didn't, charge him with anything. They didn't indict him. But, there's the federal investigation over the documents handling and January 6th. And then there's a Georgia investigation over his election interference there. So those still are to go. Now, whether they indict him over this, it's like anyone's guess. No one would have thought that the Stormy Daniels thing was going to be the one he was indicted over. That seemed to be old news. That seemed to be, something that he didn't have to worry about, but they went with it. Now, why? It's politically motivated. Alvin Bragg thinks he'll make a name for himself. This is something he can run for higher office on, as being the guy who indicted and possibly convicted Donald Trump. This is good for his political prospects. And he's also maybe thinking that the best area to indict Trump and have a trial for Trump is in Manhattan. I've been seeing some talk that they could move the venue. Whether that's the case, I don't know. That's up to the legal system. So whether they can do that or not is another matter. But they feel that if they get him before a Manhattan jury, they'll vote to convict. It doesn't matter what they charge him with. They could just make up a crime, and the Manhattan jury would vote to convict. And Manhattan's an insanely liberal place, full of like awfuls and other shit libs. They're going to vote to convict Trump anyway. And so this is a flex that's just saying, like, we can do this, and we don't care. And now there's all the theories about why they're doing this. Now, There's the conspiracy theory that they're doing this to defeat DeSantis, because everything that happens to Trump is eventually about DeSantis. I don't want to dwell on DeSantis too much because I've ripped into DeSantis a lot in the past few episodes. But, on the internet, this is very much similar to back in 2015 and 2016, where all these conservatives, many of the same people, argued that Trump was a Hillary plant. And the reason why the audience dislikes him so much is because conservatives are being misled by Hillary. And now they think that they're indicting Trump in order to help his campaign. And, even like there's people arguing that he wants to be arrested, indicted for donations, which I don't know, that doesn't even make much sense. I don't think anybody wants to go to jail or be indicted, but some people think that because they're so motivated by resentment towards Trump for whatever reason that they'll just spout these crazy ideas. But the main conspiracy theory is that this is done to defeat DeSantis. It was in the same when people in the federal raid happened, back in August. They were like, this is actually about DeSantis. It's like, no, it's about Trump. And the motivation is not to, hijack the primary and make sure that the easily beatable Trump gets the nomination over the unbeatable DeSantis. DeSantis is not as strong of a candidate as people imagine. And DeSantis has a Trump problem of how he wins an election when Trump clearly hates him and is not going to support him. And the solution for that DeSantis fans have is let's put Trump in jail and keep tweeting about him like a jilted ex-lover. I don't think that's going to work, but that's their strategy that they're going with. And so the chief theory is that this is done to help Trump win the primary. That is not the chief reasons for doing this. They want Trump in jail. They don't want him to run at all. They really fear the prospect that he can win again. This is something that they have nightmares over. This is their worst nightmare. This is the last thing they want to happen. And encouraging it to happen or paving the way for it to happen again. Like you could maybe have argued in 2016 that they were happy to have Trump as that they saw him as beatable. But Trump won in 2016. And depending on you ask him, he did pretty well in 2020. And, he has another good shot again. I mean, the polls show him, there's a lot of polls showing him beating Biden. And they don't want to have him in power again. They want him in jail. That's what they want. They do not want to. They don't fear DeSantis that much. They don't care about DeSantis that much. If they really did, they would be trying to indict DeSantis or throwing him in jail or making him or disqualifying him from running. It would not be elevating Trump in the way to defeat DeSantis. I think DeSantis has a lot of his own problems. I mean, it's going to be tough for Republicans to win in 2024, no matter who the presidential candidate is, unless there's a major economic downturn. If there's a major economic downturn, the Republicans could probably win with whoever they put up. But at this point now, I think it's be very tough for Republicans to win, no matter who they put up. There's not some candidate who's going to have a huge landslide. It's especially not DeSantis. And there's all the problems with DeSantis making sure those Trump voters turn out for him and are enthusiastic, or that Trump doesn't want a third party. I mean, there's a lot of concerns here. And, a lot of issues going on with that. But, I mean, the main point is that this is not done to help Trump. This is done to put Trump in jail. And I think any conspiracy theories otherwise to that is just people trying to cope and try to claim that their preferred candidate is the real threat to the system when the system doesn't really care about him and doesn't really mind him that much and doesn't even, the person they really fear is Trump. That's why they want to put him in jail, no matter what crime they find for him. Now, how much will this help Trump in the primary in general? I mean, it clearly is helping him in the primary. And his latest polls show him with high 50s. I think one poll showed him with 57% and another poll showed him with 56%. And I think the 57% poll showed it as a 10-point jump from last month, and the 56% poll was also a double-digit jump from previous poll. And so it is correct. This is helping Trump, and Trump is going to be the centerpiece of this, and it's also creating a lot of Fox News attention towards him. Fox News is having a little bit more of a tense relationship with him. They're not wanting to highlight him as much or do his interviews with him as much, but this may change with that, even though he's going to have some type of gag order or something. I don't know how that'll be effective. I mean, he'll still be able to talk about other subjects. I don't know how that'll work, but they clearly want to do that so he doesn't isn't able to speak in his defense in the public eye. Well, I mean, this is a public case, and it's pretty ridiculous to tell a presidential candidate he can't talk about it. But they feel they want to do a flex again. So it certainly helps him in the primary, and I think unless Trump as I always say, unless Trump drops out, he's going to win the primary. The question is how this plays out in the general election. Now, because the charges are so flimsy, and I think voters have already been aware of Stormy Daniels and this stuff, and they see if this case falls apart and other things. I mean, he got impeached, and the impeachment that happened to him in 2019 was a complete non-factor in 2020. Nobody remembered the impeachment. It was people forgot about it when 2020 started. I mean, it happened, I think, in November of 2019 when he got impeached. Or maybe December, may even been a little bit later. But by the time, I mean, obviously COVID and other things, but even before COVID became the main thing, people had already forgotten about it by the beginning of February, and it was just a complete non-factor. And so the same could be with this indictment. Everyone could possibly forget about this depending on how the case falls apart or how the case goes. That could be the factor, but it will help him in the primary. Now, what will hurt him in the general election is a federal indictment. Maybe the Georgia one. The Georgia one seems even more all over the place and ridiculous than and it's even a more corrupt prosecutor or dim-witted prosecutor than even the Manhattan DA. So I don't know how that'll play out, but the federal indictment, it will hurt him in the general election. But as I said, even if he was indictment free, and even if there was another Republican candidate, if there's not an economic downturn, they're still going to have a tough time to win. And I always say this, if you're going to lose, you might as well lose with somebody who's going to represent your side and advance your cause. And electability is just, if you're going to base that on as your sole factor, then you should support Tim Scott. I mean, it's if it's all about just Republicans winning, that's not the point. The point is to push our side further and push our cause further and advance that cause. And Trump is the best vehicle for that. And all these people always ask us, what is the unifying cause we should have? Or what are you about? What are you to advocate for? And I think some people want some grand ideological dream goal or something of that sort or these things. But even then people argue over that, and that's not really appealing. For the right, they just need a short-term, immediate goal that has a degree of plausibility of actually occurring and is actually appealing to normal people and can actually raise awareness on the public stage, and really is just electing Trump again. Trump 2024 is probably the best immediate cause for us. And so, yeah, obviously there's a lot of flaws with Trump. Obviously he's not perfect. Obviously we could imagine someone being a lot better, but there is no one better, and there is no one else to advance what we believe, to believe that the rotten state of the globalist American empire, to believe, that we want a country, we want to put America first, we want immigration restriction, we are tired of political correctness, we're tired of what happened to the J6ers, all this type of backlash. I mean, Trump represents white backlash more than anyone else. That's what his 2016 campaign was about. 2020, wasn't as much about that, but 2024 is going to be about the white backlash candidate. And DeSantis just represents some appropriation of Trumpism by normal conservatives, but he is ultimately more of a conventional Republican than Trump is. He is not that white backlash. He is not the vote for retribution, as Trump is promising, as the vote for, against these corrupt leaders who rule our country. Trump is the protest vote for that, to represent that cause, much more so than DeSantis. DeSantis represents a return to a pre-Trump 2016 with some better features, even though I think people overstate how good DeSantis is. But that's for a topic for another day. But it ultimately represents a return to a pre-Trump 2016, or pre-Trump Republican Party, while Trump represents the Trump GOP and further advancing and further cementing the party as a Trumpist America First vehicle. And that's why you have to support it. And in lieu of any type of because there was this post I had that I'll talk about this a little bit more, but I do want to on the immediate cause is like there was this post where this guy was saying, I think Malsbury Marion or something about, I think that was this guy's name, and he was like saying like, we need a grand force or idea to motivate us, and I'm just thinking, mainstream right just wants to be left alone. And that's still their main overriding goal. I mean, even if you're thinking about national divorce and its support, that's primarily on leave us alone. It's like they're not leaving us alone. There's too many woke ads or just something. And so I want to separate a country to be left alone. While with the internet, right, there's so many competing niche ideologies and fringe ideas that, there's not a unifying force for this. And it's especially gotten worse over time. Compared to, the alt-right back in 2015 and 2016, it was pretty united around similar ideas. The problem was a lot of those ideas were not very popular and were alienated a lot of people, but they at least had a shared cause and shared ideals. But now, what really helped the right in 2016 was having this shared unifying cause of Trump, of getting Trump elected, of supporting Trump. And you really just have to replicate that again. And yeah, I know there's like even criticisms and follies with that, but there's no other real alternative. Otherwise, you're just, tweeting about national divorce now while, doing jack shit about that or doing anything to advance it and living in a country where that's just not going to happen because normal people don't want to have that. They're not affected by that. But normal people are going to want to pick who the next president is, and making the case for Trump and them convincing people to pull that lever for Trump, that can lead to a lot of big changes and a lot of serious developments, positive developments that we want to happen. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in the tie-in between all these topics. But the third topic, big news item, was Ricky Vaughn's conviction, which was compared to the other two things, I don't want to say that they're complete black pills because I think they were expected. But this was a pretty big black pill. I mean, he literally is getting persecuted over memes. I think most people know the story, but Ricky Vaughn, Douglas Mackey's his real name. He got, arrested back in 2021, first week of Biden being in office, actually. And one thing is, like, people want to complain about Trump, but Trump's DOJ kept blocking the prosecution. They kept blocking the investigation, saying they were not going to have any charges. Biden's DOJ gets in there, immediately press charges over memes. And the point of the case is to send a message to the online right and to send a message to the online space, because liberals still have this trauma from 2016 over what the online right did and what these meme smiths did. And they feel that they hijacked the election. And they, like people like Ricky Vaughn, they really got bothered by that. And now they want us, it's once again sending a flex. It's like, botting them and saying, if you do this shit again, we're going to put you in jail. And it's trying to set that precedent that memes that they disagree with and they don't like can land you in a jail cell and could be a serious federal felony. They'll say it's election interference. And once again, they kind of, even though the venue isn't as bad as Manhattan, I mean, the outer boroughs are a little bit better where it took place, but they still were able to find liberals. And I think, the two black pills from this case is one that, well, I mean, there's more than two, but I think with some of the things going on in the case is that there was a defense witness who was supposed to be called. I don't know. I forget if people have named him, but I don't want to feel like naming him. I don't want to bring more attention to him. But the Southern Poverty Law Center began intimidating this guy, like, we're going to write a hit piece on you. We've got all this information on you. And from what I gather, the information isn't even that bad. But for like most people who are not like, faced with this type of scrutiny, they don't want to deal with that. They don't want to have that ruined just for them, serving as a defense witness, which they're going out of their way to help somebody. And, that the intimidation worked. And it appeared that, some of the federal government was working with the SPLC or to, encourage that fact. The hit piece hasn't come out on him yet. I don't know what's happening with that guy, but they saw him as one of the defense witnesses, and then they went after him, to try to find information about him, which most of the information from I gather is benign, but people don't want to have an SPLC hit piece on them regardless. As that sticks with you, and Google always, somebody with a couple SPLC hit pieces, that really sticks on your Google search. So so they intimidated them and they were able to get away with that. And that also happens with a lot of right wingers case, is that people who will be called offense, that they can easily intimidate them by just simply saying, hey, SPLC is going to write an article about you, or HuffPost is going to write an article about you. Like, why are you coming to defend this racist? And maybe you tweeted something, or maybe you liked something that we didn't like, and we found that. And are you really going to risk your reputation to do this? So they're able to intimidate them. So that was pretty disappointing. The other disappointing factor is that their star witness was Microchip, who was another right-wing social media influencer who. He's always a strange guy, and he always claimed that he started Q, and I had no interactions with him at all. But I remember him seeing around, and then this guy just testified, and this guy's like about what you expect for some of the online what maybe the media expects for some of the people involved in this stuff. He had a neck beard, long disheveled hair, morbidly obese. Didn't wear a suit, didn't even dress nice, wore a full, according to the New York Times, he wore a full piece blue sweatsuit, like sweatpants and sweatshirt to go along with it to testify in court. Didn't even bother dressing up. And the whole time he basically said, I don't like Ricky, and we did these bad things. And they're like, what are your political beliefs? And it stated just straight nihilism. It's like, I was just there to, shit post, and he even tried to claim I was a liberal. I just really didn't like Hillary Clinton. I wasn't racist. I was just into nihilism and all this stuff. And it's just a total betrayal of what everything he had advocated for and worked for and talked about, is that he just betrayed that. Now it's due to the fact that the feds arrested him and he flipped. And not only did he flip on this case, he's now working with them on other cases, which means his social media networks are now used to either entrap people or to help federal investigations. So that's something that's a worrying sign. But I think it's also, this guy shows, I think, a level of commitment among these people. Now, I'm not saying if you got arrested a lot of people, that's a tough thing to go through. But I think for a lot of people, you see all the time, I had some guy posting about how, quote tweeting me over the weekend about how I need to show that I'm willing to die for some cause he came up with. And then I have to remember, it's dude, there's so many people who rat, not even when faced with jail time, just faced with getting a hit piece written about them. And I don't want to mean this as an attack on the guy who was supposed to be a defense witness, but I'm just saying in general, is that people fear that consequences for their actions or for what they do. It's why people are anonymous, and I support that. But I just want to say is that a lot of people online, they act like they're hardened guerrillas, or that they're ready to die for their cause, and they're ready to go through all these deprivations for Civil War stuff. And then you have to think, it's looking at real life, you see guys who flip on dudes who flip who just annoy them, or they get arrested. Even in Ricky Vaughn's case, I think Nayland testified. Paul Nayland, if you guys remember him, who's this congressional candidate who went off the rails, became Fed posting, and managed to get banned from Gab, which not only did he get banned from Twitter, he got banned from Gab, which is quite the achievement to get banned from Gab, and due to his crazy posting. And he doxed Ricky Vaughn, and he doxed him over, just annoying him. And so you're seeing the level of just people just, they disagree with one another, and they'll dox people and they'll defend it, or they'll start cooperating with lefty journalists to, attack somebody else, or they'll just totally disavow their beliefs due to any consequences they face. And, it just reminds you, when you see all this crazy rhetoric about I'm ready to die, I'm ready to do these crazy stuff for my beliefs, and you're just a coward. And I have to hear this from people who've never faced any consequences for their beliefs at all, which I have a lot. Every day I feel it. It's I'm publicly associated for the rest of my life. I can't have a normal job. Even I have to worry about the ability to have Airbnb or even a bank. I don't know if I fear that much of losing my bank account, but it's a possibility. And this is the public consequences you have. And then you have to have these guys who literally, this is just a form of entertainment for themselves, from the nagging wife or whatever ordinary concerns they have. And they're acting like they're hardened guerrillas just because they're shitpost, and it's like, no, it's not. It's like, look at all the real cases of this, and there's all these guys who are just federal informants who are still involved in this stuff, like Chris Cantwell, the crying Nazi guy. He was a federal informant. And and when he was a federal informant, he kept begging the feds to arrest people who were annoying him. And the feds were like, we don't really want to deal with this shit. Like, okay. And, he got arrested. He got charged for, threatening to rape and murder another white nationalist family because the guy annoyed him or something. And those threats got him in jail. But he's like been able to come back as a meme icon because he in the Steeville trial, he recommended people the jury read Mein Kampf. Surprisingly, that strategy did not work. And he was friends with that Victor Boot guy. But he still, at the end of the day, was a federal informant. And he signed that confidential informant agreement probably just because he wanted to rat on people he didn't like, or I don't know what reason, but he is a federal informant. And so you see a lot of people just flip or, provide docs information, or whether it's because they fear consequences for themselves or whether they just don't like people and they want to hurt people within our sphere. And so there's not really, a way to, counteract that or to, really condemn that in a way. And it's just so that when people are all like advocating for this extremism and stuff, and I just have to say, it's like, look at these guys who are advocating for extremism before. They got arrested and they flipped, or they, and it's an unfortunate fact. I don't think people are as committed to their beliefs as people say. And that even comes out to with the jury part of the thing, which is another black pill, is that clearly there were a number of jurors. How many? It's unclear, but I think I want to believe is more than one. So I will say maybe 2 or 3. There's definitely holdouts that did not want to convict Ricky Vaughn. They felt that this was, for whatever reason, they just felt it was not a guilty offense. And this was announced on the second day of jury deliberation. The judge kept pushing them to say, hey, they read an Allen charge saying, like, we've spent a lot of money on this. You better come to a unanimous agreement. And eventually on Friday, they came with a guilty verdict. And what this shows is that a lot of people, I want to believe these are Trump supporters, they're conservatives, but they fell before the moral persuasion, the moral force of their accusers, of the people who wanted a guilty verdict. Now, maybe they just felt peer pressured as being the one holdout. Maybe that they just wanted to go along with the flow. Maybe that they were just tired of this and they were tired of being hassled and they just voted for guilty. Or maybe they just felt that they didn't want to be, they were tired of being called a racist. And also what the federal case was made about Ricky was that, oh, look, he posted all these racist memes and all that, but he was not on trial for that. He was on trial for supposed election interference. But they wanted to establish the fact that this is an evil guy, that this is a racist, and you don't want to associate with this guy at all. And clearly the moral force of that argument had an effect on the jury. The jury wasn't just operating, objectively. They were clearly seeing this guy as an evil racist poster. And so there's probably people in the jury who are like, this person threatened our democracy. This evil racist threatened our democracy. How can we allow this? And there's probably jurors who are just like Trump supporters, like, I don't buy that. This is a political case, blah, blah, blah. But they are eventually worn down and they voted for a guilty verdict. And I think that happens with a lot of conservatives, that they're worn down by society. They're worn down by the messages they see all around them. And they just kind of conform to them just so they'll be left alone. And I think that's probably what happened here, is that this guy maybe wanted to go back and watch the Final Four, get on with his life, and he was just like tired. Or maybe it was a she, that they were just tired of being, harassed by the jury, and that they didn't want to feel like they're racist because they feel that that's a bad thing to be, and they just decided, okay, I give up. I give in to this, which there's very few cases where you can see that with a leftist. So the leftist was in this case, and maybe the whole jury was like, conservative, and that person could just say, you guys are all racist. I'm definitely standing by my beliefs, and they would stick to it. Or they're a black lady. There was a case, this African serial killer in Texas who had killed a bunch of old ladies and robbed their stuff, Billy Kimmerer. I think that's how you pronounce his name. He's African. And the first trial they had for him, they couldn't get a guilty verdict because there was one juror who refused to vote for guilty. why? And they're like, do you need to see more evidence? They're like, no. And my suspicion is this woman was a black woman and felt there was nothing wrong with a black guy killing elderly white women and stealing their stuff. And so she refused to even budge. No budging. And then probably the fact that like this is a black woman and they don't want to, face the wrath of a black woman, that they just listen to this. There's another case in Florida where the forewoman who was a minority herself, they were about to deliver a lighter sentence for this this black guy who was convicted of manslaughter. He committed a home invasion and brutally murdered his victim. But they were about to put it down to agree to a manslaughter charge because 3 black women on the jury were saying, like, we can't put another black man in jail. Like, this is racist. And the rest of the jury was like, oh, okay, we'll just go for manslaughter charges. And the forewoman was seeing the defense celebrating over this, and she changed her mind and said, I'm a no vote. I can't vote for this for manslaughter charges. I believe it should be murder. But they have the moral force, and they do that with moral power. Now, there's no black women on the jury, to the best of my ability, to the best of my knowledge, from what I've heard. But I think that these guys just got worn down, and they got pushed into this, and that's why they voted for a guilty verdict. And I feel like a big problem on our side is that despite the tall talk and hyped up talk that they say on Twitter, is that a lot of these guys, unfortunately, will capitulate if they're put in a stressful pressure situation like that. Which, I mean, hats off to Ricky Vaughn that he didn't cave or capitulate at all. I mean, this whole case is centered around people capitulating to screw him over, and he didn't. And for that alone, despite him being a martyr, along with him being a martyr, is he hasn't backed down. He hasn't apologized. And throughout this case, like, there's a lot of people who caved on the courage of their convictions, but he stuck with it. And I think that's what makes him admirable. That makes him a model for other people. But when I hear all these people talking about this type of extremism and radicalism that they need to do, or demanding I support some radical action and that they're ready to die for their cause, I have to look at this like, just look at the Ricky Vaughn case. Like, this is what happens. You just, for memes, you get thrown in jail. And like, there's just so many people capitulating. I don't want to, the only person I'm trying not to attack is the SPLC defense, or the defense witness in that. I'm not saying that, but I want to say that there's a lot of costs that come with these beliefs, and for a lot of people in our sphere, they think that they don't really understand these beliefs until it affects them, and when it affects them, they have a new mentality on this, or when even they just look at other cases, they have a new mentality. And for some people, they go in the extreme direction where it's like, my life is ruined, I want everyone to ruin their life, and so come and join me. Others who learn from that and just decide, like, how can we ensure that other people don't ruin their lives just by having certain beliefs and stating them openly, and figuring out ways to make this more palatable and more appealing to a larger degree of people. That's what I try to do. I mean, that's not very popular on Twitter, on social media, but it's what I stick to regardless. But that's some of the cases, I think. But I mean, I went into a niche discussion of the Ricky Vaughn thing. I think the larger point is what I said earlier. This is them flexing. This is the left, the establishment, saying that we have the power to prosecute you for memes. You better follow the line. You better not try to disrupt our plans. Otherwise, you're going to be the new Ricky Vaughn. You're going to be sitting in a jail, and we can do whatever we want. And that's what that's behind the Trans Day of Visibility, and that's behind the Trump indictment, and that's behind the Ricky Vaughn case, because they really do want to prosecute speech. They want to bring those type of hate speech laws to America. They want to be prosecuting people over Facebook posts and tweets and all those things. They want that here. And fortunately, we have a First Amendment. Fortunately, we have a lot of conservative justices, or even there's a lot of liberal justices who stand up for the First. There's still a number of liberal justices who will understand the First Amendment. Not the majority, but there's a number. And most of the judicial system still stands strongly for the First Amendment. But the Democratic Party and a lot of the institutions that they have influence over don't respect the First Amendment. They want to end free speech. They want to take away our rights. And this case is one of the opening salvos in that, to undermine it, because it's not about election interference. They're just upset that Ricky Vaughn had an influence over the election, and they want to punish him for that, and they want to send a message to everyone else online who's posting. But the white pill I have is I don't think it sent that message. I don't think people are going to listen to that message. And I think people are going to continue to post and share information, whether the feds like it or not. You just got to be smart about what you're posting. Even what Ricky Vaughn posted wasn't even wrong. I mean, compared to some of the shit that people post all the time, like, it was a joke. And it was an effective joke, too. But I guess we can't do effective jokes anymore. But what people post, I'm like surprised that they haven't gotten a knock at the door or some of the type of violent posting that people do. But it is what it is. I don't think people are gonna. They really are intimidated and scared by this stuff, which I guess it's more of a white pill, is that they take, the people in power take what we do very seriously, and that they would waste a lot of time and money to convict Ricky Vaughn. So that's one way of looking at it. The other thing I want to point out is the question of morality and moral power and moral persuasion in our country. And I had a post about this that some people got mad about. People get mad about anything I post, but I guess people got more mad about this. Is the tactic of, and it's the principle of what we're about or what we're trying to achieve. And I want to say, I don't think we have an answer for that yet, or at least for the internet, right? And you really just need an immediate actionable goal, and we'll figure that out stuff later. That's really the best thing, because like if anything I said, everyone would get mad about that, and people just can't agree on that at this moment. Those things can change, but this is repeating a prior discussion, but just expanding upon it. Is that the mainstream right and mainstream left can be seen as this way. As the mainstream left wants to further advance equality in our society. Now, what they mean by equality is subject to change, and it's very bad, but they do feel that they are advancing equality and advancing individual self-worth. Is that, when they celebrate a drag queen, they think that this is like, we're celebrating people for who they are, and this is awesome because we're all created equal. And for the right, they just want to be left alone. And they're just like, look, I don't want to be taxed so much. I don't want to have my property invaded on. I just want to live my life the way it is, and I don't want to be hassled or and be confronted by a lot of weird things. Now, the desire to be left alone is able to be manipulated to accept a lot of these things, because people will say like, oh, well, you don't want to accept drag queen story hour in your community. Well, if you protested or something, we can make life very difficult for you. We can make sure that you're not left alone. And so people will like, okay, I'll accept it, whatever. I just want to be left alone. It's the same with ads. It's like people don't want to take a lot of action, because then they'll rationalize it as like, well, there's a lot of woke shit on TV, but at least I have a home and a nice TV, and nobody's coming to steal that stuff away from me. And if I do something about it, I could risk all these things I've built up, and I just want to be left alone. And so there's, in some ways, there's a new goalpost moved in terms of being left alone. And even, it's motivated a lot of the white flight. It's even motivating a lot of the right-wing discussions about fleeing to rural areas or national divorce. It's all about this desire to be left alone, which the left, sometimes they'll try to appeal to that. They'll say, look, all these transgender and drag queens just want to be left alone, and they'll like use that type of argument. But the primary argument, moral thrust, is to this inherent sense that equality is a good thing, the diversity is a good thing, and individualism and individual self-worth is a good thing. And they say, we're, by all these crazy ideas you think these are that we're promoting, they're actually advancing them and achieving them and realizing them that a way that the bigoted right just doesn't do. And the right, in response, mainstream right, will just say, look, whatever you freaks do is fine, just leave me alone. And they'll be like, okay, we'll sort of leave you alone, but we'll bother your kids, but they'll move the goalpost. And so that's how it happens. And I think a lot of people wonder like how the left is able to achieve this stuff, is that there's, some people argued in this is like the masses don't really have solid political beliefs. there's a point to that, but a lot of it, due to the mainstream programming, I mean, they can change on an individual subject. Maybe one day they're told illegal immigrants, we got to welcome them in because they're just, hardworking future Americans or something. But then the next day they'll like figure out that they're maybe the same program tells them something different, and then they can change their mind. There's a lot of people that can be changed like that, but it's probably overstating it that these people can just suddenly change overnight. It's a process. And a lot of these people do, when they are told equality is like, we are all equal, all men are created equal, they're like, yeah, I agree with that. That's so true. And so the left is able to appeal to that moral consciousness. I always mispronounce that word, but their moral sentiment in a way the right cannot. The right appeals to a desire, a kind of not a moral or higher desire, but just a simple desire that's shared by a lot of people that like, look, I just want to be left alone to live the life I want to live. And in confrontation, the left wins because it has more moral power and more moral persuasion. And I think we could have seen that in the Ricky Vaughn jury deliberations. I guarantee you the factor was there is that the conservatives just wanted to be left alone, go back, watch the Final Four, and they agreed to the guilty verdict so they wouldn't be harassed. And at the left, they felt that this was a moral cause, that they were morally empowered, that they had to take a stance for democracy, and this evil racist was threatening democracy, and they had to put him in jail. They had a real moral force behind it. Well, I don't think there was as much moral force behind the holdouts, which is why we ended up with a guilty verdict. And when you ask for the answer to this, I think I don't think we're going to come up with a grand goal at this moment. Maybe over time, like maybe in 10 years that there's some grand goal or some new moral framework that we have. I don't think you're going to fully overthrow the moral framework as it exists now. I think you really just need people to think on a direct, practical manner of just saying no. No. It's like resisting that type of moral blackmail that the left uses and just saying, no, this is wrong. I feel it's wrong. This is not advancing anything good. This is advancing corruption. This is advancing the end of my civilization. I think just people thinking that, and just having the courage of their convictions, just having that type of bravery, feeling that what they believe is right and good is all you really need. And I think a lot of people, a lot of conservatives and right wingers, maybe they don't feel that way. And maybe it's because of media programming, because there's a ton of examples of where somebody's like a bigot, or they even have any type of conservative or right wing beliefs, and they're shamed for it, and then they're by the overwhelming moral persuasion of their accuser that they come to that conclusion. If you guys listened to the American History X IQ supplement last week, that was very much a theme in the movie, is that this racist Derek Vineyard realizes that the moral power of his black principal, black mentor, is just, you can't resist it, and he just has to succumb to it and make his life better. And I think that that's a theme found throughout American media, American culture. And I want to emphasize that the left is able to push a lot of these things because what they feel is good. They feel is moral and right. And they really, really believe this stuff. I don't think that this is just... Some people, like, the degree of belief does vary. I think a majority of the people, they maybe aren't as strongly tied to this stuff. But some people are really committed to this stuff. I mean, there was an example where... this happened in Canada. Granted, this happened in Canada, where a fire alarm was going off and it was buzzing, really... Everyone, I assume, has heard a fire alarm. Like, that is, like, deafening. You get a headache. You just want to get the hell out of there, wherever the fire alarm is. And these parents who had, like, babies and, like, little kids, there was a drag queen story hour, and they went into the drag queen story hour. They didn't flee the drag queen story hour. They kept going in, and they weren't just bothered by it. And it's like... that's a real, that's a little bit of a sacrifice. That does show commitment. They're not going to be dissuaded by a fire alarm. They're going to stick to this moral cause that they're a part of. And they're just going to do that. And there's other examples of where people just think that this is moral and right. And, the CMT Awards over the weekend, which happened in Austin, But the country music industry is obviously based in Nashville, and they had the Covenant School shooting, and they have these trans bills. And one of the performers, Kelsey Ballerini, never really. I have not kept in touch with country music in like 10 years since I graduated college. Or first year out of college, I was keeping in track of it, but I haven't kept much track of it since then. So I don't really know much about her. But this woman had a performance, and she's from rural Tennessee. And she had a performance with drag queens. And, she didn't try to explicitly say, like, I'm making a statement, but she said, it's unfortunate people are going to say I'm making a statement, but I'm fine with it being interpreted as a statement. As I'm standing up for all, and we've got to stand up for what's right. And what's right is standing up for drag queens, and Tennessee's been getting a lot of flack for banning drag shows for kids. So this is clearly a political statement made by an artist where her primary audience is red state Americans who agree with drag queen bans and live in these states that are pursuing such bans, especially about transgender surgery. She does her, big performance is about to get the most attention and most media awareness and biggest audience, and she declares her support for drag queens. And that just shows, when people want to talk about cultural balkanization and like how people are living in completely different spheres, and like one culture is totally woke and the other culture is completely anti-woke. It's really the opposite. Even the red state culture that they enjoy is, I argued this in an article, a few weeks ago, even their culture, NASCAR, country music, Yellowstone, it has woke messaging in that, or it bans a lot of the things that are politically incorrect. And this is just another example of that. Even there's a rapper, Jelly Roll, who is actually from a nearby community that I grew up in Tennessee. It was not a nice community, but he's a white rapper who's turned into country, and he's got face tattoos and stuff. I guess that's not the worst thing in the world compared to the drag queen performance, but he won a bunch of awards there. So it's very much showing that even the stuff that's made for red state culture or red state America is still inhibiting or exhibiting a lot of the traits of blue state America or woke culture that you would see. And this is done by, a lot of I can guarantee a lot of country music artists were probably like, you shouldn't have done that. But, they're not going to raise much of a ruckus over it because it's like, whatever, it's just drag. They may just say it's just drag queens, but it's clearly an insult directed at Tennessee and a lot of red state people. And I see a lot of cope that like, oh, nobody listens to mainstream country. And it's like, yeah, Red America listens to it. They really into it. And then it's just like, people have like ready to made cope. And no matter what happens, it's like they're into cope action. Sometimes you got to keep optimistic and positive, but I think a lot of times people just have an ever-flowing supply of copium. If copium was an energy source, like right-wing Twitter would be wealthier than Saudi Arabia. It's like, it's always on tap. But even there, it's like, what do you guys think like rural Americans are listening to? Like Beethoven? Like, come on, man. Like, most country is, comparatively speaking to other music forms, is less degenerate, less woke. They don't really try to. Some of these artists do try to make woke songs, but those aren't really the songs that are played on the radio. And it really does become. It's relatively depoliticized, which in our culture would make it unwoke. But a lot of these artists are libtarded, and a lot of the audiences, they do test the boundaries of how much the audience will tolerate, and the audience is more likely to tolerate this than, say, a left-wing audience tolerating a rock band flying the Confederate flag, which is why Leonard Skinner had to take away the Confederate flag. They're much more tolerant of this display than the left is. The other degree of copium is I'm seeing many of these people who get extremely mad if you suggest not watching the NFL are now threatening to boycott Bud Light and hurt Bud Light where it hurts. And I'm like, conservatives can't be bothered to boycott anything. Like, I've just given up on. Like, I'm thinking about changing. I will not watch the NFL on the Greer pledge because people get so mad about it. Like, it's like. The only form of activism that can motivate people is to vigorously defend the NFL from any possible critics. And, now they're trying to say, like, oh, Bud Light, you've made a wrong choice. And it's like, NFL has fucking end racism in the end zones, and you guys will, like, you guys will die for the NFL. Like, I think people will die for the NFL much more than they will for politics, based on some of the vigorous reactions I get. I think there's more people willing to take a bullet for the Philadelphia Eagles than they are for right-wing political beliefs at this moment. But, like, yeah, I think you probably shouldn't drink Bud Light because it sucks in the first place. But, if Bud Light actually does suffer some repercussions from this would be, I support these boycotts and people not buying them. But I've already seen what's happened with the number one target for a boycott and how conservatives, 2016, 2017, we're no longer watching the NFL. And many of these people are now like, I will attack you. I will kill you if you dare criticize the NFL again. And so I just hope that people don't turn into zealous Bud Light defenders in 4 or 5 years. They shouldn't be because, the beer sucks. But I just want to get that out there as some of the copium I'm seeing. But I don't want to try to black pill people too much. Some people are going to say this is a massive black pill episode. And some people complain I've been black pilling too much. And it's like, you guys better be thankful because a lot of the internal thoughts and things I've been thinking over, I have not expressed because there is, I'm like, that's just too black pilling. I'm not going to suggest. I just am being honest with a lot of people. And I think maybe sometimes I overreact a little bit because I see to just the, completely outlandish copium I see on a regular basis. But I do just try to keep people realistic and practical. And I think with a lot of these events we're seeing, both with the kind of them flexing and, the cultural changes were happening, I think, there's some things to understand. It's like, one, our people, right-wing Americans, red state Americans, even just white Americans in general, whatever you wanted to call our particular group of people, the people are Republican voters. They're not in a revolutionary mood. They're not, they're upset about a lot of things, but they're not ready to, throw everything away for whatever, outlandish cause that you've suggested or fantastical cause that you've suggested. Now, that doesn't mean that they're totally, blue-pilled. I've talked about the complacent majority, which I think some of these people do fit in. There's like a lot of people are just not that tuned into politics. They're centrists and independents, and they accept a lot of things. And some of the Republican voters, you would say that they're a little bit more complacent. Some are less complacent and are more upset by these things. Others are just like, oh, well, what do you expect? Yeah, of course, you're going to see a drag show at the CMTs, I guess. But some people have not gone that far. And you have to direct these people to actionable items and actionable goals. They're not ready, they may say national divorce, but then if they're told of the consequences of national divorce, they're probably like, I'm probably not a fan of that. But if you told them, like, hey, don't you want to eliminate diversity, equity, inclusion, indoctrination in schools and businesses? They'd say, hell yeah. Do you think that they would support ending affirmative action? They'd say, hell yeah. If they would, they can even be made to be pushed in the direction of bringing down the whole civil rights regime. They'd say yes, or even limiting immigration. You've got to reach people where they are and tell them like how these issues directly affect them, and then they can be swayed into changing their behavior. And there's still ways of doing this through politics. You can still, affirmative action may be, face a serious loss to the Supreme Court this year. It's most likely to happen. There's a lot of diversity, inclusion, and equity bans going on in a lot of these states. And maybe that could even happen on a federal level if we get a Republican president in charge. And as I argued in I keep saying as I argued in my column, my columns are just so good, you got to read them. But as I argued in another column about immigration, being the best identity issue, Trump, a Republican president, and Trump did this as president, can do a lot to restrict immigration. And so these are a lot of actionable items. I think when it comes to culture, it's a much murkier territory. And the one white pill of this is I want to say is that a lot of people enjoy woke, or maybe not enjoy, but consume woke culture, but they still have very strong right-wing beliefs. a little bit of culture is downstream from politics, but both are a little bit separate. Is that a lot of, I know a lot of people who watch like really woke TV shows and they listen to rap music and they're still, pretty right wing. They're still, ready for this. I myself don't like to consume things that I disagree with, but I'm a little bit different person. I don't think most people think that much about it. They're just like, I like this song. The show's entertaining. I don't really think much through it. That's one sort of white pill I want to think. But some of these messages bury deep within people. And for a lot of apolitical people, they still will view the world through the culture that they consume. But for a lot of other people, it's just mere entertainment. And I don't want to say that, like, just because you see something incredibly woke on TV, that means people are totally broken. I mean, you could even argue this with the NFL. I think the main problem with the NFL is not so much the wokeness, it's more the encouraging black worship. But I do think that's a topic for another day in the NFL and sports betting, which I was supposed to bring up sports betting today, but obviously we've talked about this enough, and I still got a ton of cognitive elite questions I got to get to, so we're not going to get into that. But I think even with that, like, there's a ton of right-wing people who still watch sports and stuff and like other things. I think it's better that you eliminate these influences, because sometimes some of the influences are just going to be bad. I think Marvel movies in and of themselves, if you like Marvel movies, or if you're really into one of these fandoms, you're more likely to be libtarded than others. Even NBA, I think, is like that. NFL's a more complicated subject, but I think for other things like some of the trashy entertainment or other things, like, it may not have as much of an effect as people think. So that's kind of one white pill I want to think. But I think, that's why it's more murkier territory. We have to focus ourselves on concrete politics at the moment. And the best thing for concrete politics is, like, ties all of our beliefs together and ties it into unifying cause and could actually happen. Is Trump 2024? Some people may say he can't win. We've got to have national divorce or civil war or this type of stupid stuff. And it's like, I have to deal with this idiotic shit all the time. But guess what? What's more likely to happen? Trump 2024, are you getting the Habsburg integralist state? If you want to say what, let me guess. It's a very easy answer. It's a very easy answer of what's more likely to happen. And so some of these people are like, let's just indulge in fantasy. Fantasy doesn't answer any problems and is unappealing to ordinary people. You've got to tell people, like, how you're trying to change things and what they actually care about. They don't care about the Habsburg integralist state or whatever they want, whatever you're suggesting. They just want, they can be made aware of certain problems going on in this country, and then you have to say, like, here's something to do about it. And yes, a second-term Trump would not solve all the problems, but it would push us in the direction of getting there to solving all the problems. Eventually, this is going to be a long-term cause. It's not going to be solved overnight, and you have to push things in a direction to where we can get to that place of final victory. And Trump would not be a final victory, would not be the total victory, but it would be a change in the right direction, and it would be even a greater victory than his win in 2016. And the odds are very much stacked against it, but the odds were stacked against him in 2016, and they were stacked against him in 2020 as well. And there's no other alternative to this. And if we want to keep advancing our ideas and make them apparent in the mainstream, you have to support the guy who's going to do that, and that is Trump 2024. And I want people to be white-pilled and optimistic about this. I think it's like, there's going to be a lot of struggles with this. There's going to be a lot of obstacles, but I think it'll be a fun experience. I think it'll have a lot of mimetic value just as much as in 2016. And I think it'll capture a lot of the idealism and positive spirit that we had back then. And it's kind of gotten ruined by some black pills and cynicism. I've been guilty of that as much as anyone else. But I think you need to overcome that and try to push forward. Over time, I think a larger term goal, it'll come about eventually, but right now suggesting one that is like firmly ideological is probably going to alienate a lot of people and maybe even make it less appealing to the mainstream. So really just national salvation. Make America great again. That's enough of a common goal for all of us. And I think that's something simple and something that we can define. And a lot of people are like, yeah, I want to make America great again. They may have a different idea of what that means, but you can push them in the direction of it, meaning of their new meaning for it being closer to yours. So that is my long discourse on this subject, and that's it for any other subjects. We're gonna have to go to Cognitive Elite. I really wanted to discuss sports betting and the problem of it, but sports betting is not going away anytime soon. So we'll maybe either do that as an IQ supplement or do it for next week. A lot of people got upset about my discussion over it, so we'll explain that about how it's so harmful and we have to ban it. So I'll discuss that for another day. But now on to the Cognitive Elite questions. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the Cognitive Elite option at Highly Respected Substack. And that's at highly-respected.substack.com. And make sure to sign up for the IQ supplements while you're there if you haven't already. And there's tons of great columns for there. So if you, for some reason, don't want to sign up for the IQ supplements, make sure to sign up for the free subscription so you can get all those columns delivered straight to your inbox, and all the columns are free and open to the public. But the IQ supplements are, behind my paywall, so I can afford a castle someday. So that's my long-term goal to milk my supporters for that. Okay, first question comes from Friendly Groiper. I think there may be 4 different questions today, so we've got a lot. I'll try to get through these quick. One is going to have to be quick, but the first question is, Scott, what are your thoughts on Richard Nixon, based or cringe? And he suggests that this should be an IQ supplement, and it should be. There's not a very good short answer on this. I think people overstate how based he is. More I read about him, the more I think he is cringe. I think his foreign policy was good that he pursued. I like the realism in foreign policy that he did, and I'm actually a big. I think detente was actually the right move, but that's not as much concern to us. Throughout his time, he expanded on integration and civil rights. He really fully supported the civil rights regime. Not only when he was vice president, when he was vice president, he was one of the strongest advocates for integration and furthering creating a civil rights regime. And he could have been arguably said to be more pro civil rights than JFK in 1960, even though that's a real argument to be made. I mean, both were about the same. In 68, he did promise law and order. He did try to bring back, he did appeal to that populist upsurge that was there. And I think that was positive. And I think on a personal level, he really did understand these issues that a lot of other presidents did. But his main goal wasn't advancing those personal interests. It was about his own political power and about making a statement. And I think that's led to one of his downfalls. I think Watergate's total bullshit. I don't think there's much there at all. I think he's also a very interesting figure, so I don't want to say he's totally cringe, and he did have a lot of interesting ideas, both personally and he would say publicly. But even as president, he expanded affirmative action, and he did this to win over black votes. And he wasn't able to appoint a lot of the good justices that he wanted to both the federal court and the Supreme Court. And at the same time, one good thing he did do is start the war on drugs, which I'm very pro. We need to restart again, especially with the amount of drug use going on in America. But he's more of a complicated figure. I would say Eisenhower was a better president. But Ike also had some interesting private views as well. But Nixon, he had a lot of potential to do great things. But he didn't do it, and some of it was due to the legislative balance. Then, I mean, Democrats controlled Congress when he was president, so he couldn't really do that much legislatively. And one of his worst legacies was expanding affirmative action, expanding the civil rights regime. So, and you have to keep that in mind. So he campaigned on a message that we would like, but when in action, he, more betrayed. And people always want to complain about Trump. Trump didn't do any full betrayals. He just didn't accomplish some of the things he set out to do. There's nothing that Trump did that was any type of equivalent to Nixon expanding affirmative action. But more people are willing to criticize Trump while see Nixon is awesome. But I wouldn't. It's complicated is my answer. But Richard Nixon IQ supplement is definitely needed, so I will talk about the discussion or talk about that subject more in the future, so be on the lookout for that. So on to the second question. This one comes from New England Refugee. He says, He's talking about the French writing. With the French writing about the 2-year raise in retirement, it got me thinking about how our system is going to face that crisis soon enough. Social Security is expected to be insolvent in the next 10 years. Do you think millennials and boomers will have Social Security? And do you think they should give us the chance to opt out so they don't take out of our paychecks and we can save it ourselves? Boomers will have Social Security. I don't know about millennials. Maybe you meant Gen Xers there, or Zoomers, but the one problem with the Social Security thing is that any changes to Social Security are politically disastrous. And conservatives are more willing to talk about, privatizing Social Security or eliminating Social Security than they are about, in the past than they are about full-on immigration restriction. But I am buying more of the arguments, but it's ridiculous for Republicans to buying into the arguments that something needs to be changed about it. But I am skeptical, or it's not even skeptical. I don't think Republicans should ever campaign on the issue. Trump is setting himself up to be a more moderate candidate by promising that there will be no changes or cuts to Social Security and these government entitlements. These are incredibly popular, and the people who vote Republican are dependent on these benefits. So any Republican who campaigns on this is going to lose. I mean, probably the primary and definitely in the general election. I think Mitt Romney suggesting these ideas in his campaign in 2012 contributed to him losing. But it is a major problem that's going to happen. And they do say 2033 is when it's going to be insolvent. So there needs to be changes to be done, but at the same time, anyone who does those changes is going to suffer at the ballot box. I don't know. I think extending the retirement age might do some help. I mean, people are living longer, but a lot of the thing is like this is based on the idea that most people are working middle class jobs that they enjoy and they don't mind working an extra 2 years. There's a lot of people who work jobs like once they turn 65, they're like, I'm done. I don't want to work this job anymore, and that is. Why it's so politically fraught that they don't want to engage in it. But there has to be something done. I think if they do lose these benefits, I think it'll probably be changes of benefits to younger generations rather than to boomers. I think in America, younger people would maybe accept those changes more because there's so much level of apathy, and a lot of teenagers don't think that they'll ever, they're like, 65, wow, that's like a million years away. Well, for Gen Xers and boomers, they would get really, really, really mad at I think most boomers are about to achieve those benefits or already have those benefits, and Gen Xers are prepared to win them. So I think it's more millennials and Zoomers that are going to have changes done in order to keep it solvent. Well, that's this is once again another issue that I should look into. There is an argument I heard from a friend make that there is like an immigration restrictionist argument to be made for changes to Social Security, because a big reason that they argue for mass immigration is to keep this worker base, to keep paying into it. And they're like, well, we need these people to come in to pay in Social Security, so let's open the borders. But if you made the changes, there'd be less of that need for those people to pay into Social Security. And thus it would alleviate some of that pressure, or at least the business pressure, or that argument to be made for immigrants. So it's an interesting argument. I'm not sure I 100% buy it, but I do find that is interesting. And so we'll investigate this more, but that's my question. I don't think, I'm a millennial. I don't think millennials and Zoomers are going to have Social Security the way that boomers are going to have it and the silent generation have it. I think we are going to witness changes to it, whether we have to wait till we're 70 to get it or whether we have it at all. We'll have some form of it, but we may have to wait the benefits may not be as good, or we may have to wait longer as we age. It's definitely going to be different by the time we're 65. That's not that far away for some of us. So that's my opinion on that. So that's the second question. We've got a lot more questions going forward. This question comes from Jay. Jay asks, it seems like a lot of the dissident right is non-white. Why is that? Or do you agree that it is even the case? I don't think it's majority non-white, but it's surprisingly non-white for a movement that's race realist. And It's a tough question because some people get into this for different reasons. I think for a lot of the Hispanics who make up the majority, I think a lot of them just aren't fans of magic. They're not fans of blacks, and they get into it through that way. And also, I think a lot of Hispanics don't have a problem with whites, and maybe it's their way of assimilating into whiteness is by getting into this politics. There's that. But it's mainly a lot of people at the fringes of whiteness. There's a lot of like immigrants from, places that's like, well, debatably whether they're immigrant. A lot of people from the MENA category or from, you know, well, Southeastern Europeans would be white, but maybe they're not the Anglo standard. There's a lot of Armenians, a lot of Persians, a lot of other groups that are really at the fringes of whiteness. And why do these people get into it? It's like I think these people are naturally outsiders. Like they come into this country and they're not part of the in group. If you are a standard Anglo like me, or you're there, you're the in group still for a lot of places. Even though a lot of people hate the in group and you have a lot of anti-white messages, for the average suburb, you are the standard population. And there's a lot of things around you that you just think is the normal. Of course we listen to rap music. Of course there's rappers on TV or this type of things. And they just kind of accept it. And a lot of these people have a better job of fitting in. If you're just like a Chad white guy who's like a star athlete in school, you've most of your life's probably been good. I mean, unless you've had like some family issues or some financial problems, largely your problems have been fine. I mean, you've gotten a hot girlfriend, you've probably went to college, you probably got a nice job after it if you're charismatic. So you're not really that willing to question things. But a lot of these outsiders, they go to a school, they clearly see themselves as different, and so they come at these things from an outside perspective. And maybe they're better able to recognize the racial dynamics and realities of society than people who are born here, who are heritage Americans. And I think a lot of heritage Americans will wake up to this if they they're applying for a job and somebody who's black gets the job instead of them, or they want to apply to a college and they had all the grades and all the qualities to get in and they didn't get in because of the color of the skin. That can change their perspective. But I think with a lot of these people at the fringes, they're dissident from the norm, and they are more willing to question these things, I think, than a lot of the standard white Americans are. Because I think for a lot of the standard white middle class Americans, life is still pretty good, even though there's some real challenges and changes coming on that could impact that. For the most part right now, it's still largely good. And even for these outsiders, it's relatively good, but they do feel different and they want to. And I think this also encourages them to get into left-wing politics as well, is that they want that sense of belonging and they're more desirous of change because they've always been an outsider and they don't want to be. They're open to either outsider ideas or into more open to changing the social dynamic than others. And so that would be the deeper theoretical cause. But I think even for Hispanics, it may be just as simple as they don't like blacks that much, and they see this as a way of assimilating to whiteness. So both those theories, but that doesn't really explain the why there's so many Menas involved in this, and Armenians and Persians and other groups, and some of that going on. I don't think that explains it. And even with Hispanics themselves, a lot of these Hispanics don't even, a lot of them have assimilated into the middle class that are getting into this stuff. So that may not explain it. That might not be as the best explanation for it. So, yeah, I would not say that it is majority non-white, but it's way more diverse than it was 5 or 6 years ago. Even a lot of the people on Twitter, you could easily tell who's like Hispanic on Twitter, especially if you talk about Anglo-colonialism versus Spanish colonialism, and these guys will get really pissed and triggered about Anglo-colonialism. I'm like, why is this guy so angry about that? Or complaints about work ethic and stuff, or WASPs. You'll see some of these arguments made by these people, but I would not say that the majority, but there are a significant number of them. And that question came from Jay. I'm making sure got his name out. And here's the final question. There may have been more. A lot of people were asking for ways to ask questions, and I sent an email with it. Hopefully, everyone got that email. If you haven't, or if there's some problems with it, just sound off in the comments, and I'll try to correct it. But this question comes from Cato. This is a lighthearted question. He's like, was just going to ask this. I've long felt that the emo goth scene kid movements of the 2000s and early 2010s were the last explicitly white cultural output. Ever since then, culture has been blacked. Would love to hear your thoughts on this topic. Ah, man. The scene kid movement of the 2000s is the last stand of implicit white cultural identity. In some ways, that would be a mark against white identity. Because I mean, I went to high school at the peak of it in the 2000s. I remember kids all with the hair and stuff, and I went even to the shows. I was a metalhead, so I was not into the music at all. And I thought that music was really gay, so I was not into it. But I went to a lot of the shows because that was just the shows you went to. I mean, most of my bands were not coming to play Nashville. So you went to a lot of the scene. It was based on mostly white music, but at the same time, they were trying to incorporate, there were some bands that were trying to do scene rap. And there was even some bands that were trying to incorporate dubstep, but I guess dubstep wasn't explicitly black, but I mean, so there was kind of that admixture going on there. But it, compared to kind of the Wigger stuff, it is more white, but it was also really ridiculous. And it was also very androgynous as well, as it really was a forerunner of modern trans stuff. Even, people complain about this with hair metal, but these guys would dress up with women, and then they'd all write songs about banging women and traditional masculine activities and stuff. And there's, hair metal was a bizarre thing, but emo and stuff, that was guys who acted very feminine and had very feminine attributes. And even the type of song lyrics were, very whiny and feminine. And maybe this was it set the stage for kids to just go take the next level. It was not only I'm going to have kind of weird long hair and adopt kind of a feminine manner, I'm just going to go straight to being a woman. And so maybe that was it. I mean, and some of those things are different. Goth was different. I like a lot of goth music. I don't like emo at all, but I like a lot of goth music, as a lot of metalheads do. But a lot of stuff, it was very androgynous, very feminine. So I would not try to praise it, but it was white. It was popular, and most kids grew out of it. I mean, there's tons of kids. I mean, it's now seen as the thing that kids, Gen Xers in the 80s, they talked about, oh, my big poofy hair I had when I was in my hair metal thing. And now that's the same with millennials. It's oh, look how ridiculous I looked back in 2007. And now that's the thing. It's look at my dyed hair, or this weird hairstyle I had. So that was it. But at the same time, I think most of those people grew out of it. There's a lot of right wingers who into it, but it was really cringe at the time. It's funny as a nostalgia and as a meme, but I don't really want to celebrate it too much. It was just bad music, and it really was. The more I think about it, it's more of the precursor to a lot of the trans stuff, because it was even more aggressively androgynous and feminine than any other past music, and it really forced a lot of these guys to adopt a more feminine manner. Even though there's a lot of guys who are into this stuff who were on the football team and jacked, but they're still dressing weird, to say the same. But all youth cultures are kind of stupid in their own way, and the way they dress, especially. And you learn this as an adult, but. Was it better than listening to rap music? I would say yes. But maybe the styles and output associated with it weren't very good. And I just didn't like the weepy music. And it's you didn't call me, so I'm cutting my wrists. It's why don't you sing about some real stuff? Why don't you sing about some Tolkien and some horror movie and some like horror movie situations? I think that's a lot better as metal does. So that might not be the best answer to this question. So that is it. So that is it for today. I think, as I said before, there's some cognitively questions that people have been keeping asking about that. I did send an email about that to the cognitively people. If you didn't get the email, or if it somehow didn't respond to it or whatever, just sound off in the comments either here or on the Substack, and I'll get to that. But that is it for today's episode. It was a long episode. Got a lot of discourse in there. Hopefully a lot of people got informed. I'm sure there's going to be some people angry. So like for most of the commenters, make sure to go. And if you're really mad, to post a long angry message in YouTube. I certainly enjoy those comments that everyone loves to make. So make sure to do that. But for everyone else who enjoyed the episode, we've got another great IQ supplement coming up later this week. We already have a column up. I didn't really discuss it that much, but it's called Unpatriotic Youth. Some of that delves into the discussion we had today, and maybe I would have gone over it a little bit more if we had more time, but we are out of time, so look forward to that. And we're going to have probably another column or two later this week as well, so be on the lookout for that. So until next time, stay respected.